Hello, welcome to News Center. With me, Parikshit Luthra. Let's start with the markets. The benchmark indices slipped 1% each amid weak global cues. The market is also awaiting U.S. inflation data. Sensex fell over 400 points. Nifty fell over 100 points. It managed to stay above the 18,000 mark. Bank and mid-cap also closed in the red. Nervousness persisted in the global currency markets too. The Indian rupee weakened on the back of a strong US dollar. $1 now costs nearly 82 rupees. Other Asian currencies were also trading lower against the dollar. Cryptocurrency market is in turmoil. Binance, the world's largest crypto exchange, has abandoned a proposed deal to acquire FTX, which is another large exchange. Manisha Gupta is here with more on the chaos across cryptocurrencies.
Well, it has been a disaster, yes. 48 hours after announcing that it is looking to acquire FTX, Binance has walked away from the deal. On the 8th of November, Binance had agreed to rescue FTX and signed a letter of intent pending due diligence. Today, citing due diligence, Binance has abandoned the deal. In its statement, Binance pointed to reports suggesting that customers' funds may have been mishandled. With FTX teetering on the brink, founder Sam Bankman-Friedman has lost nearly 94% of his personal wealth, making it the biggest wealth collapse for a billionaire in a single day. The collapse of the platform's token also impacted celebrities like supermodel Gisele Bündchen, American football star Tom Brady, and basketball player Steph Curry, all of whom have a substantial amount of their wealth tied with FTX. The FTX contagion has also spread to the rest of the market, with investors wary of a liquidity crunch. Global market capital of cryptocurrencies is now below $1 trillion mark. The last count was $850 billion there. The Bitcoin is trading at a two-year lows, and that's exactly what you have seen with other cryptocurrencies, which have continued to trade below their crucial $20,000 mark, especially for Bitcoin and the other major coins seeing cuts of more than 50% from the start of this year. Whether it is about Ethereum, Cardano, Dogecoin, Solana, they're all down, and there is simply no place to hide. Solana probably is the worst affected over the last few days. It has fallen 45% in the last 24 hours after fears that FTX sister company Alameda, which holds the token, could sell its share. So chaos across cryptocurrencies.
The Supreme Court has extended the status quo on commercial cultivation of genetically modified mustard seeds at least till the 17th of November. The union government argued that opposition to GM seeds is based on unfounded fears, and regulators in US, Canada and Australia have reported no adverse effect on health. The Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee of the Environment Ministry has approved the commercial cultivation of GM mustard. Abhimanyu Sharma is here with the details.
The Supreme Court has extended its status quo order till the 17th of November on commercial cultivation of mustard. A batch of petitions have been filed before the top court challenging use of genetically modified mustard, claiming that there will be concerns not just to environment but also to human health. The union government, meanwhile, has been dismissive of these concerns and has claimed that these unfounded fears will hurt not just India's farmers but also the industry and the economy at large, since India imports 55 to 60% of its edible oil requirements, and use of genetically modified mustard is going to substantially increase the yield of mustard crops and will make India far more self-sufficient in production of edible oil. The union government has cited similar experiments which were carried out by various expert bodies in the past, and has also said that the regulatory authorities in various Western countries have already allowed use of genetically modified edible oil seeds. They have also pointed to the fact that India already imports canola oil and soybean oil, which has been derived from genetically modified seeds, and there is no reason why the same should not be extended to mustard in order to ensure that India becomes self-sufficient in the edible oil. It remains to be seen what further observations will be made by the top court in this regard and what contentions will be raised on the next date of hearing by the petitioners.
All right, thanks Abhimanyu for joining us. Let's also speak about the fertilizer subsidy bill. Now, the ballooning fertilizer subsidy bill may pose fresh fiscal challenges for the government. The union government is staring at a bill close to 2.5 lakh crores this fiscal, almost 3 times higher than FY19. Sapna Das gets us the math on the fertilizer subsidy and what it means for the fiscal.
The fertilizer subsidy is a crucial part of the government's expenses every year, and the trend over the last few years has been a bit worrying for a government that is keen on sticking to a fiscal glide path. During the last 3 financial years alone, fertilizer subsidy has been clocking a new high every year. From a modest 73,000 crores in 2019, the number has nearly jumped 55% in 2 years to 1.33 lakh crores in 2021, and then to a record 1.62 lakh crores last fiscal. For FY23, this number is expected to come in anywhere between 2.25 to 2.5 lakh crores. This is based on the fact that the Department of Fertilizers has asked the Finance Ministry for an additional 1.48 lakh crores, which means that the budget will nearly double from its original size. Of this enhanced budget, 1.4 lakh crore is broadly earmarked for urea. That's 125% higher than the budget estimate. Nutrient-based subsidy is expected 112 crores, which is 166% higher than the original budget outlay. A 2.5 lakh crore fertilizer subsidy bill is huge for an economy of India's size. Even at an expanded nominal GDP of 237 lakh crores, this works out to 1% of the GDP. It's also a little higher than the food subsidy budget of 2 lakh crores for FY23 if the additional financial burden brought on by the government's free food and grains program, the PMGKY, is not counted. But the government is hopeful that the shock of a higher subsidy bill will not spill over into the next year. According to government officials, as the ripple effects of global lockdowns and the Russia-Ukraine conflict fade away, next year's fertilizer subsidy bill is likely to be lower, helped also by lower input costs and softening gas prices. In the meanwhile, the government is caught between a rock and a hard place because it remains committed to protecting farmers, and fertilizer subsidies are a crucial part of that. On the other hand, it also wants to maintain its fiscal glide path. The only silver lining is that when it comes to fiscal deficit, the government can deviate from its target if extraneous circumstances beyond its control continue to play out.
All right. Thank you very much, Sapna, for joining us. Let's focus on the COP27 summit, which is currently going on in Egypt's Sharm el-Sheikh. Developing nations have asked richer nations to walk the talk on climate finance. India, on its part, has insisted on a new global finance target by 2024. The insistence comes after rich nations failed to mobilize funds worth $100 billion per year by 2020, a goal they had set in 2009. There have been a slew of financial pledges from developed nations to disaster-struck poorer nations, as well as over 100 CEOs have shared an open letter highlighting their willingness to work with governments on their climate plans. Remember, the United Nations has sounded caution on emission targets, saying they are nowhere near what's needed. Moreover, a report released by the United Nations has highlighted that it was time to draw a red line around greenwashing by governments and corporates. To take this forward, I'm now joined by Feek Sijbesma, Honorary Chair at Royal DSM and also member on Board of Trustees at the World Economic Forum. Thank you very much for joining us here. Let me begin by asking you, what would be the big priority right now for the World Economic Forum? We are seeing many countries in Europe increase their reliance on coal. The Ukraine war has created a energy uncertainty and energy crisis as well, with prices soaring in many parts of the world. How realistic is it for companies, for countries to work towards the emission targets that we had set earlier?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for being in your program. I think that in the past, move to renewable energy was mainly driven by climate. Today, you can say moving to renewable energy could create a cost saving compared with fossils, which prices has increased, and could create independence, where today, especially Europe, has a strong dependence on imports outside Europe of fossil resources. So I think the movement to alternative energy helps climate, helps independence, and might help even cost price on the longer run.
Just to also ask you, many countries, many developing countries have said that this $100 billion investment that we're talking about annually for climate finance is just not adequate. We need a clearer definition of climate finance. And when we speak about climate finance, it has to be concessional finance. To what extent do you agree with this? And what more can be done to increase climate financing to developing nations at concessional rates?
Yeah, Parikshit, a very good question. From the World Economic Forum, I founded and co-chair also the CEO Climate Leaders. That is a group of 125 companies global multinational companies, also some of those who are incorporated in India, who are progressive in climate. And we just sent out a letter this week about what we believe as the private sector, what should be done. And we agreed on sharper targets on emission reduction, on the carbon pricing, on having a clear framework of reporting. Today, there are about 650 different measures in the world how to report on climate and sustainability. We would like to move to one ISSB system close to what in the financial sector IFRS is doing on the finance reporting. So we as companies step up, and we need to do that around the world. Important in this COP, different than previous COPs, is that next to mitigation, where companies can step up and governments can set better targets, adaptation will also be high on the agenda. And especially since the COP is in Africa, Africa more or less is staying in this COP. We Africans, but the same counts for Pakistan or Bangladesh or your country, we cost the least, we suffer already today the most, and we hope that you do care. And with the hope that you, especially the financing.
All right, let me go across to Antonia Gawel.
This bills is very
we lost you for a moment.
Adaptation. Companies who have the technologies need to find the ways to exploit the technologies, and there this financing could be an important role.
Right. Feek, we'll request you to stay on with us. Antonia Gawel is now joining us on the phone. Thank you very much for joining us, Antonia, Head of Climate Change at World Economic Forum. Let me begin by asking you, there has been a pledge from the companies, from the 100 CEOs who are signatory to that letter, that they would reduce emissions by more than 1 gigatons annually by 2030, reduce scope 1 and 2 emissions by 22% from 2019-2020 emissions. What would be the legs, what would be the measures which will help attain these targets?
Yeah, no, happy to be here, and apologies for joining by phone. It is patchy connections here. So indeed, as you say, this is a group of companies that are incredibly committed to decarbonizing not only their own operations, but also their supply chains. In terms of the legs, I mean, really, decarbonization comes in three parts with three legs. One is that the companies are already very much decarbonizing all of the assets under their own control. The second is also related very much to decarbonization of electricity supplies. So where they procure electricity around the world for their operations, there is a lot of work to be done to directly decarbonize that electricity system as a huge contributor to CO2 emissions globally. And the third piece, as you noted, is about decarbonizing their value chains. So what this means is, on one hand, decarbonizing and working with players upstream in terms of what they procure, the suppliers into their system, working with them in partnership to decarbonize, but also working with their consumers. So where they're selling products to, be it business consumers or also end consumers, how do we make sure that those products are also decarbonized and not adding and exacerbating the climate change challenge?
The letter has also spoken about putting a price on carbon and fossil fuel subsidies. How do you propose this? What kind of a roadmap?
So a price on carbon really is something that economists and really us and many others have been advocating for many, many years. If we were to properly price this into the system as a whole, then frankly, we wouldn't be in the place that we are today when it comes to the climate crisis. So we do need to rebalance, let's say, the pricing so that we invest less in the things that are causing harm and we invest more in the things that can accelerate our transition to the clean energy transition. There are various tools and mechanisms to put a price on carbon, different types of policies. So in certain cases, you have an emission trading scheme. In other cases, you have types of incentives. Feed-in tariffs, for example, was used for solar, that can help implicitly put a price on carbon as well as incentivize the positives. So I think the pathway there is multifold, I think, depending on the country and the political context. And there are many tools. So price on carbon is critical. Reduction of fossil fuel subsidies, again, is a challenge that nations have been struggling with for many, many years. This is a challenge, I think, in particular in the developing world that has to be managed in a just way. You can't suddenly remove subsidies that increase prices on citizens. You need to be thoughtful about, on one hand, incentivizing investment in the renewable alternatives and then pivot in that direction while lowering subsidies to the fossil fuel power generation and other sources of fossil fuel as well.
Right. My final question to Feek. Feek, when it comes to conditionality of sustainability, what is the roadmap that companies can follow, what companies can do?
Companies, and we are doing that with this group of 125 leading companies. Companies should be net zero, some by 2050, some by 2040. Companies should set a target on 2030. Many have a target of halving their emissions by 2030. Companies should set a clear roadmap towards this 2030, because let's be honest, 2030, 2040 is for some companies 3-4 CEOs down the road. So that's easy to commit only, but you need to have a roadmap also on those steps. Like Antonia said, carbon pricing is also important to embrace that. And you can start already by putting an internal price on carbon and managing your company like that. We said the carbon price need to be meaningful, and we think that $50 to $100 per ton would be an important, meaningful trigger. So companies can do a lot on the reporting, on the target setting, on making this roadmap, on embracing carbon pricing, and sharing their strengths and technologies with others in the supply chain, because companies cannot do it in splendid isolation. If we look especially to the so-called scope 3, the emissions in your whole supply chain, you can only do that with your suppliers. So that is what we advocate companies do.
All right, Feek Sijbesma, also Antonia Gavel, thank you very much for joining us here on News Center, giving us your view on COP27 and what companies, what the private sector can do in collaboration with the government in order to reduce carbon emissions. The other big story we're tracking, Russia has announced that its troops will retreat from the Ukrainian city of Kherson, but Kyiv is not celebrating just yet. In a televised event, Russia's Commander General said troops will withdraw from Kherson. This is yet another setback for Moscow as it continues to struggle in Ukraine. However, President Putin was not present at this event, raising a few eyebrows. Ukraine is worried that Russian forces are trying to lure its troops into costly urban combat. Ukrainian authorities said they made strategic decisions based on intelligence data, not staged TV statements. Here's Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Russia's announcement of withdrawal from Kherson.
Потроху рухаємось, укріпляємо позиції крок за кроком. В інформаційному просторі сьогодні дуже багато радощів і зрозуміло чому, але емоції наші мають бути стриманими завжди. Ворог не робить нам подарунків, не робить жестів доброї волі. Ми все це виборюємо.
All right, take this forward. I'm joined by Sergei Dvoryanov, President IDC Russia and Director WHD International Board, Bohdan Nahailo, Chief Editor at Kyiv Post with us, Ruslan Botnik, Director at the Ukrainian Institute of Politics with me as well. Bohdan, if I can begin with you. Ukraine is looking at this Russian retreat from Kherson very, very cautiously. Why is that?
It's actually Kherson is the way it's pronounced. Look, because it could be a trap to lure the Ukrainians into the city, and it could be urban fighting, but it could be the use of a tactical nuclear weapon, chemical weapons, etc. So the Ukrainians are very wary because it's almost too good to be true for the Russians to announce publicly that they are withdrawing. On the other hand, the Russians are desperate to keep this corridor open from the Donbass, from Russia to Crimea. And so it makes sense for them to retreat across the Dnipro River, leaving Kherson, the city, in the hands of the Ukrainians eventually. So it is a major psychological victory for the Ukrainians and a message sent to the Russian population about the way it's going, but it doesn't mean that the war is by any means over. This is just one stage, and the Ukrainians are very wary. not only because of the complications of taking Kherson itself, but the fact that these troops that are being deployed in that area will now be moved to other sectors of the front and will put pressure on Ukrainian troops elsewhere.
Right. Ruslan, if I can put that question to you as well, do you think this is Russian strategy to regroup and maybe launch attacks from other parts?
Of course, we can say so, but I think the Russian retreat is the main reason of Russian retreat because of doing of Ukrainian armed forces, because Ukrainian armed forces destroyed and damaged almost all key bridges across the Dnieper River to its right bank, and Russian troops in the right bank of Dnieper, it was not less than 30,000 of Russian troops, was without of equipment, ammunition, food, and moreover, at any moment, armed forces of Ukraine could go on decisive offensive and completely defeat that group of Russian troops which were pressed to the river of Dnieper, and it should be a great defeat and absolutely catastrophe for Russian army. So I think the first reason is to gather, to serve this part of Russian troops, and of course Russia understands that there is no chance to use this right bank platform to go to offensive to Nikolaev and Odessa for nowadays.
Right. Sergei Dvorinov, if I could ask you about possible talks between Ukraine and Russia, do you think there could be some negotiations on the way ahead in the days to come? Sergei, if you can hear me?
Yes, first, most of civilian population of Kherson was evacuated. And yes, I can hear you. I can hear you. Yes, definitely. Hear me right now? Can you hear me? Yes. Hello?
Yes,
can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Yes. If you
Yes,
can hear
we
me,
can hear you, sir.
I can continue. Yes. The most of civilian population of Kherson was evacuated. And Russian generals, they did this decision to save the soldiers. That's why the decision is not will influence the main strategy of Russian national leader Vladimir Putin. And regarding your questions of negotiation between Russia and Ukraine, we can tell that our position is always open to dialogue, because we are not under the pressure of Western countries. We actually want only safe population, Russian-speaking population of eastern part of Ukraine. That was main and only one reason why that special military operation was started. That's why right now we can see that Vladimir Putin is very open. He will not participate in G20, but he will send our Minister of External Affairs, Mr. Sergei Lavrov. And I can see that it's a big hope right now to start of negotiation and dialogue with Ukraine with the support of global peacemaker India, because India can be mediator and can help to the global society stop the war. That is my opinion.
All right. Sergei Dvorinov, Bohdan Nahailo, Russian Botnik, thank you very much for joining us here on News Center. We've run out of time, but this is a story we'll continue to watch very, very closely. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of News Center. News continues on CNBC-TV18. Stay tuned.